keep doing what you're doing. Notice what you notice. Keep bringing forward your concerns, even when you feel like they're left unheard. Don't let it go. Keep bringing it up. Keep bringing it up because you really could save the life.
Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, the space where education meets resilience. I'm Dr. Joey Weisler, and in each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories of educators, students, leaders, and frontline advocates who are navigating the complexities within modern education. Whether you're just starting your teaching journey or are a seasoned professional looking for inspiration, we'll explore how to foster meaningful change, prevent burnout, and build trauma-informed communities within our schools. Now, let's take a seat at the front of the classroom as we get started. Hello, and thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Classroom Narratives podcast. As we begin this segment, I would like to establish a disclaimer that our conversation today will focus on gun violence in schools and throughout society. Please take care of yourself while listening. Now let's introduce our guest. Today on the Classroom Narratives, I want to begin with a few words from the anthology, If I Don't Make It, I Love You, edited by Lauren Kleiman and Amy Archer, with contributions made by members of the Sandy Hook community, as well as other institutions impacted by gun violence. Abbey Clements, a second-grade teacher at Sandy Hook Elementary School, writes about the moment that changed everything. She writes, "He turned left, and we were on the right." In those few words, she captures the randomness of survival in a moment that reshaped a school, a town, and a nation. Another passage of the anthology, written by a parent whose name is Susie Ahrens, reflects on what came afterward, what it meant for children to return to school. Ms. Ahrens' daughter witnessed the murder of her first-grade teacher, Vicky Soto, during the tragedy, and she describes her daughter's second-grade experience the following year in Ms. Clemens' class, where she says, "Her teacher didn't always have the words to make things less scary, but that teacher showed up every day and taught her children, taught my child, what it means to be brave and to be kind." And those lines speak to something that we talk about very often on this podcast, which is that quiet, everyday courage that teachers carry. My guest today is that second-grade teacher, Abbey Clements, who has spent decades in the classroom and was teaching second grade at Sandy Hook Elementary School on December 14th, 2012. In the years since, she has become a national advocate for educator voices and conversations about school safety and trauma healing. Abbey, what an honor to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It gives me chills when you read that.
It gives me chills to read it as well, because it really makes me think about the power that we are doing every day as educators, both during and after tragedy as well. So I want to start by talking about the If I Don't Make It, I Love You anthology, because this work by Kleiman and Archer is one of the first texts that I picked up when I was doing my doctoral research to really understand how trauma impacts communities. And I don't remember if it was one of the authors or if it was Fred Guttenberg who created the foreword for the book. But the anthology, which covers a wide variety of tragedy, labels gun violence as a public health crisis. And what you do is that you have become a significant conduit for bridging voices together to help them find their healing in their aftermath. So before I get into some of my own reflections with your own organization, Teachers Unify to End Gun Violence, which you also run alongside Sarah Lerner from Parkland, a previous guest for us as well, I want to think about how you have seen the idea or the act of teaching actually evolve. And what do you wish that people outside of education understood about community traumas in schools?
First, I'd like to say that educators, school staff, what they do every day in supporting children, guiding them, instilling confidence, teaching them problem solving, talking about like conflict resolutions, how do you deal with emotions? All of that is gun violence prevention. In a country that refuses to get a handle on the fact that guns are the leading cause of death for children and teens, this act every single day from our school leaders is activism in itself. So I think the first thing I want to say is thank you to our teachers out there, professors out there, preschool teachers, support staff, because what you're doing is fighting for a safer country, by just doing the act of being the amazing teachers you are. So that's the first thing I want to say. And I say that because teachers, school staff, they're on the front lines of this public health crisis, and they shoulder immense responsibility. At the same time, their voices are not requested in terms of having a seat at the table when it comes to decision making, whether it's like school-based, local, state, certainly not federally, right? And they know kids best. And they're literally on the front lines. And I don't just mean for like a potential school shooting, but I also mean they are there to wear the hat of parent, grandparent, counselor when a child comes into class and there's a desk missing, or there was something really bad that happened in the community and someone's in a hospital, or there's a situation at home and you know about it. So there's also this like daily responsibility. And yet, teachers aren't able to ask the important questions when we see kids in crisis. Are not able to say to a parent who you might call, are there guns in the home? Is there easy access to a firearm in your home? If you have firearms, I hope they're locked up because I'm seeing these concerning behaviors. Simple. These are not partisan questions. And yet that question could save lives. So what I want to say to educators out there is that you are an incredible force, even if you can't say the words. And even if you don't feel like your voice matters. And we are honored at Teachers Unify to help amplify those voices and to bring them, I should say, to demand a seat at the table, because there's a lot of demanding, there's a lot of pushing, there are a lot of uncomfortable conversations. And in terms of your second question about trauma, in terms of like how that impacts a community, a school community, or a system, that is often not looked at. So I appreciate your question. Like, what happens to a community with a large scale tragedy? And the answer to that is it is immense. And the layers of trauma, the ripple effects, the concentric circles, the level of impact, and how do you get support to all the people who need it? Because what ends up happening often is that they think that proximity is what's seen as the most needed in a timely fashion. Get that. So important. Absolutely. What tends to happen is there's not enough room for everybody else who needs it.
Absolutely. And I love what you're saying about teachers being those frontline advocates and workers in classrooms, because we are the ones who are working with our students on a daily basis. And I was thinking, even in my first year, when I was teaching middle school in the same county as Parkland in 2019, even though my admin had known a lot of the students for several years, I was teaching 8th grade. Most of the students began in kindergarten at this K-8 school. I'm thinking on the day-to-day basis, nobody knows my students better than me because I'm the one serving them in the classroom in real time, and I can witness their growth on the spot. And what made me very angry and even betrayed was when I was using my classroom as a way to, as you hint to, Abby, focus on prevention efforts by being present, by showing care, by asking those tough questions that, looking back in the eyes of the leadership team, really could have been seen as blurring those lines between a classroom that is therapeutic and therapy for students. That was something I needed to be really cautious of. And I've done several studies and podcasts as well about what that looks like unintentionally so to some students. But one thing that definitely sticks with me is how I had a student whose students nicknamed a quote unquote a future school shooter. And when I brought that down to the social worker, she's like, okay, well, what evidence do you have? What do you expect me to do about this? And I said, my evidence is that last year I was in Parkland. Do something because you know that. And she shrugged her shoulders and nothing happened to that. And in the in between, when I was working in Parkland the year before, much like what was described from the Climate and Archer anthology, I was so buried in grief that whatever self I came to class on a daily basis was all I had as a first year teacher. We already know that the first year of teaching is hard enough, but to have that compounded from grief was so profound to me. And whatever I came in with, that was my best for that day. And for the few students I still keep in touch with, they say the same thing. They said, we don't remember your Shakespeare. We don't remember your teaching of the giver. We just remember that in the months following our community tragedy, you showed up for us every single day. You were there. You were in that classroom and you talked to us, however that looks like. So when I now present 8 years later, the Clement and Archer anthology to my own classes, and we get to that unit of collective violence in one of my introductory English courses, I actually always had them close read that particular passage from Susie Ahrens long before Abby and I had even connected. So when I finally had this opportunity to speak with Abby, it really meant so much to finally put a name to that face. So I wanted to ask, what does showing up look like in the months following tragedy? When you and your colleagues came back to the classroom, not what did your classrooms look like, but what did it mean to be present during that time?
Well, it's amazing that you received that feedback because we rarely hear that. And I think teachers who come back after the most difficult situations, whether it's gun violence or other things that happen in the communities to your students, to like deaths in the families, to come in, to have the strength, and I'll say strength because we all know teaching is physically and emotionally exhausting. And on top of it, to have the layer of grief weighing you down is an immense challenge. And so, shout out to all those educators out there who come back after the hardest of times, whatever those times look like. I think added to showing up, we know that the immense preparation that teachers go through before showing up in the mornings, right? This is never talked about. They say, oh, well, teachers, they have summers off and vacations, but nights and weekends and vacations, teachers are planning and grading and keeping up with things. And so showing up after a traumatic event, just getting there takes everything. And then on top of it, maybe you're not able to, because how could you get to that level of teaching? And the amount of pressure that teachers feel to continue to be at that high level of performance of teaching is ridiculous, truly. And it's also damaging. We were expected to resume the routine. I understand that from a perspective of like, what do the kids need? You rely on things that you can, and one of them is having a routine. It helps you kind of stick with things. It's muscle memory, but there was a deep expectation I felt to be at the level that I was at was very real and a lot of pressure. I'm not sure I even recognized that pressure until later looking back.
Yes.
But what got you out of bed, and many people say this after a tragedy, is like you want to be there for the kids and being there like they need you. Because like now, especially if you went through something terrible with them. But we often do that at the expense of our health and our mental well-being. Meanwhile, you have your own families and your own trauma and grief to deal with on top of it. So I think showing up is really so important to the kids, those who can do it. And, I think about the teachers who can't or who make a decision to take some time. And that is so much pressure. And kudos to them to be able to make that decision to care enough about yourself and your own family to say, you know what, I know those kids need me, but I'm not doing well and I need to take some time. But very few of us did that. And I guess that looks like heroic or just what's expected, but I know that it took a toll.
Definitely. And something that I came to learn by becoming a first year teacher 6 months after our tragedy in Parkland happened was that even though it added to my grief by being back in those classrooms, the knowing that I was being dependent upon from my students to be in their classroom with them every day was greater than the collective grief that I was carrying on my own. And I think that's one of the reasons why that presence was so important for me. At the same time, I'm also thinking about some mutual friends, colleagues, and prior guests from our podcast as well, Paula Reed from Columbine. And God, what an amazing person Paula is. She has definitely been a frontline figure in terms of trying to be the person that she didn't have when Columbine happened in 1999. What Paula says on the Teachers Unify podcast, hosted by Sarah Lerner in 2025, Paula says, "My story is not your headline." It's very clear. My story is not your headline to sensationalize. And at the same time, we think about just the presence that we have as advocates as well, where Paula says, I wanted to be the person that I didn't have when my tragedy had happened. And therefore, she has proceeded to speak with many, 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 many communities on her own around that. And Abby, you met Paula as well in 2012. And one story that Paula shares on her program is how Abby, you spoke up during Paula's seminar and said, I just want my old life back. And Paula's response was, I'm sorry, you're not going to get that back, but you'll come to learn and love a new version of you that will spawn from this tragedy. And I think about people like Paula, like Sarah Lerner, like you, Abby, as well, who made that conscious decision to be vocal. And then, of course, grief is so tricky because we have so many other teachers that have been impacted by tragedies like this that choose silence. And the thing with trauma is that it's so tricky that we can never assess nor determine, nor is it our goal to rationalize why people make choices that they do. I can say that Elie Wiesel, who was an Auschwitz survivor, when he wrote the memoir Night, he says that when he finally broke that silence in writing his story 20 years after the Holocaust, he said, I survived to tell my story, but I continue telling my story to help with my survival. So, in terms of being somebody who's very active in helping communities and working with prevention, I wanted to see if you could share with us about some of the things that you've learned about caring deeply for students while also caring yourself as a teacher who's also doing this work for larger communities.
So much that you said there is so important. When you talk about Paula, I can see myself and feel what it was like to be around that table. She also had with her her colleague Kiki Leba,
Kiki Leba, yeah.
who we work with very closely. Teachers Unify has been a friend of mine for a very long time since I met him that day. And that was a real wake up call and very hard words to hear. And I think as the story goes, I may have slammed my hands on the table after she said that because I just wanted to go back. Obviously, there's no going back. You're new, this is a new person. But what I learned from that day, it was like a snowstorm. I still don't even know how they got there. It was only a few short weeks after. What I learned from that time around the table is that you need someone like Kiki and Paula to come if something like this happens, because you need to know that there are people out there who've gone through it, who, even if they don't have the answers, nobody can tell you like what to do. Should you change schools? Should you stop teaching? Should you move? How do you do the same grade when you get to that lesson? How are you going to work on the day, on the anniversary? Like all of these, how do you do a fire drill with your, all of these things, like it's so helpful to know that there's somebody out there who can just be an ear. And because of that day at the table, I had wanted the idea of like a task force of teachers who've been through school shooting to be there for other school shooting survivors and teachers who've been impacted by gun violence. It was kind of immediate. I mean, pretty much started emailing people, hey, we should have a task force. Like, people need help with these things, and this is why this is so helpful. And I wasn't the first one to think of that. I mean, I know that the Columbine teachers have been advocating for that, and I know Parkland survivors had advocated for that. So, this idea that there's a team out there was very much in something that I thought was really important that was lacking. And I'm super proud that we have a crisis intervention and support team now ready to do that exact thing. So we are a team of school shooting survivors and clinicians working side by side, ready to support and also like an ear. So even if somebody wanted to just call us, there's somebody from the team who will be there for you, because that was so important to me when Paula and Kiki came. And in terms of that responsibility, you're right. How do you speak about what happened to you also when you're alive and when you haven't had the impact? Thank goodness, but also there's like a tremendous survival guilt that I think is very much a part of my experience. And how do you talk about what happened to you at the same time respecting way different outcomes? That's always been a very big challenge for me, let alone fears of like, I was still teaching for almost a decade after the tragedy. So every time I spoke out, I was kind of nervous about what the ramifications of that would be. Would I get a call from somebody when an article came out? I literally would kind of hide in my classroom when I knew something was coming out that day because I was like kind of scared of it. It never been easy for me. Even though I do it all the it's never been easy. It always comes with a lot of probably too much overthinking, making sure I'm saying things in a respectful way. However, my students who are now 21, they're watching. They're watching their teachers, they're watching their families, they're watching the news. These terrible incidences of gun violence unfolding every single day on their social media. And I feel a tremendous responsibility to do everything I can, even if it's out of my comfort zone, which is much of every single day, to show them that I'm going to try to do something in light of what happened to us.
Thank you so much for that. And of course, this seems like a natural, even though I wanted to come a little bit more towards the end, this seems like a natural segue to talk about the Teachers Unify organization as well. And the work that's being done by Teachers Unify, wow, 21. Time really goes by quickly. And because our students are now voting citizens, right? They're very receptive to what's going on in the world with the current events. And they're looking at teachers like you, Ms. Clements, to see how it's become a better society for them as well. So thank you for the work that you're continuing to advocate and allow your students to recognize that beyond their classroom walls from 2012 and beyond. So let's take this time to talk about Teachers Unified to End Gun Violence, which is an organization that you are co-running alongside Sarah Lerner. So tell us about the work being done and how the organization has formed and what's currently being done in ways that can also allow others to get involved.
So after the tragedy, after I could kind of get a handle on things, it was actually my daughter who led the family in advocacy. She was a junior in high school, Newtown High School at the time. And she immediately started getting involved. So I would even like drive her to some meetings, but I couldn't go in. I would just wait for her. I remember even hiding behind a wall once. Like, I know that sounds odd, but I could not go into a room yet. I knew I was going to join her when I could, but I needed some time. So she started doing advocacy, going on marches with my husband. And then that summer, we were both invited. I mean, it was really her, but then she invited me to like a house party with Moms Demand Action in Connecticut. And I was like, I'm going to go. I think it's time. And she couldn't go. So I had to make a decision if I was going to go or not. And I went, and it was immediately my people. I knew people there, some people from the tragedy, but it was like a room full of mostly mothers who were not personally impacted and who were there to meet some people and to try to do whatever they could to raise their voices on this issue. And I was like, this is my path. These are my people. This is what I need to do. And so I joined the movement just a few short months after the tragedy and loved working as a volunteer leader with Moms Demand Action for nearly a decade. And I think it really tied, like I did some trainings, helped organize in Connecticut. I learned so much. But there was something that was really missing, and that was a focus on educators. And I couldn't understand why there wasn't a national organization for teachers by teachers, or just like a teacher arm of one of the main gun violence prevention organizations. You know, I was like, this is a good idea. You could have like a Teachers Against Gun Violence or something. And everyone thought it was a good idea, but no one was doing it. And I waited and I thought about it and I would talk about it. I didn't really know what it would look like. I remember saying to my husband, I just don't know like what we would actually do. But I know that this is needed and kids were growing up, so all your challenges, and plus you need to work, right? So almost a decade in after the tragedy, school shooting after school shooting, community shooting after community shooting. But it was November 30th, 2021, the day of the Oxford, Michigan high school shooting. And I was texting with Sarah Lerner, who I had met, and another teacher, Sarah Beth Rosenberg, an activist in New York City. And we were in a group text, and I know either of them very well, but commonly frustrated on this issue. And we were like, it's a similar text that you text with terrible things that happen. Oh my God, did you see the news? Another school shooting. Like, why is this happening over and over again? Where did the gun come from? How did the kid get access to the gun? And where are the voices of the teachers? We never hear from the teachers. And so I asked them then, and had no plan, just something I'd wanted for almost a decade. But I said in that group text, like, do you want to start an organization for teachers by teachers? And they said yes immediately. And of course, they're high school teachers, so we had our URL, we had our Twitter handle, we had a survey ready to go out in like a day. So that was, 4.5 years ago almost. And we went from, I know as a teacher, you'll appreciate this, like had all the states, written on a piece of paper. And every time somebody, teacher filled out a survey from another state, would like put a check mark. So we got like our first 100 people who are teachers who joined us. And so my goal was always to leave teaching when I could to do this full time, because as hard as it is to launch a nonprofit and keep it going, it's really hard to do that when you're teaching full time and then doing it on the weekend. So I, had to take a chance. And so here we are. And I'll tell you some of the things that we do. So I told you about the crisis intervention and support team. Super proud of that. That is not even a year old, although of course it's really decades in theory, but we're super proud of what we do. And sometimes you have a plan. I mean, this is just like teachers know this best. You have a plan and you don't even realize like what will evolve from it. And it will look probably very different from what you had in mind. And I think even in terms of the crisis intervention and support team, I did imagine that we would be called upon more frequently when things happen and recognize the challenges there. The same challenges that we had 13 plus years ago, which is people have a hard time coming in who want to support. So we've got this system in dramatic need, and sometimes the most capable, important voices that are trying to get connected can't get in because they have their own plan, which, I'm sure it's done that way in protection. They want to make sure, they want to vet. But many times communities don't get that connection that we got with just Kiki and Paula. They came one day and I called them many times in the years after to help. So I just know the power of that. So I think that is more of a challenge than we realize. But what ends up happening with our team is that people are doing outreach on their own naturally in their own communities, getting to know what could they do to raise voices there to help maybe get schools to send out secure firearm storage information. This is a trend. This is something that's happening in multiple communities, which is something very tangible that can, of course, save lives, because we know upward at least 2 out of 3 school shooters get their gun from home or at a friend's house or a relative's house. So like, why aren't we sending home information? You have an opportunity in a school to reach a wide variety of families, like send out just reminders. So this is something that's like naturally come up. And of course, raising their voices in speaking engagements, conferences, op-eds. And we have gone to support different communities, hoping to spread the word. It's tough to get that out. And so we've got the team, and then we have our first 2 local chapters, which is very exciting. We have Teachers Unify Ithaca, and it's run by 4 retired educators. Another thing, Joey, I've learned is like the power of the retired teacher voice, a little bit different than the working teacher, right? Because they don't have to worry about what their students' families are going to think of them if they do advocacy, or if they write something, it's in the paper, or they're on the news, right? They don't worry about retribution, but they have these connections and they're trusted messengers. So we worked with these 4 incredible retired teachers from Ithaca for about a year trying to get the Ithaca Public Schools to send out arm storage. And they just a couple of weeks ago got the okay, the green light to send it out 2 times a year. Now they're still having to work and make sure. They're like, we'll believe it when I see it. But it's very exciting. And so now they're starting to think, I mean, after like a bit of rest, like possibly reaching out to like the next school district, right? Super exciting. And we're doing a similar model in Newtown. After all of these years, a group has emerged, and again, mostly led by retired Newtown teachers to get local school districts to activate. I'm also working in the state in another school district. It's like public health voice. And it doesn't have to lay on the shoulders of teachers, but like, why wouldn't the school send out reminders, especially before holidays when emotions and stresses are high, and also right before like summer vacation when kids are going to be out on their own. So those are some of the things that we work on. And I mentioned presenting at conferences, which I'm sure, Joey, isn't surprising to hear that it's challenging to get sessions brought in on gun violence prevention. Teachers Unify works at the intersection of education and gun violence prevention. I feel like it's a tough spot because we haven't been at the center of policy making, hearing of narratives. So there's a lot of work to do.
Excellent. Well, congratulations on your chapters,
Thank you.
first and foremost. And one of the things that I'm thinking about as well is just how we mentioned earlier throughout our conversation, just the repercussions that some teachers fear when speaking out. We could have several more teachers than we already know that really do want to be active, but yet they're also fearing repercussions in doing so. Therefore, they choose silence in terms of speaking out. At the same time, I have a theorist that I work closely with. We're actually doing an article right now, currently on a therapeutic classroom. His name is Adam Wolfstorff from NYU. He says that when it comes to the paradox that exists within schools, he says trauma happens out there all the time and we cannot avoid that. Yet the paradox is that we don't want to talk about traumas that happen in here in the room. And that causes a great disjunction, if you will, in terms of how we actually solve societal problems, where in terms of we know that gun violence is happening, yet we resist the urge to speak about it publicly in conferences and forums. And I feel like the feeling could be obvious to people that are on the outside, but for those of us that are inside and want to be the change agents to this, it's harder for us to wrap our heads around why people resist. So from what you have witnessed, why is there so much resistance around that? And how is Teachers Unify trying to work around that?
So if I understand your question correctly, you're referring to the feeling that probably most school shooting survivors and teachers who work in districts where there were school shooting or some major, where like you don't talk about it and you
Yes.
kind of sweep it under the rug.
Sanitize it, I'd even say.
Sanitize it. I think this is a tremendous problem. And I think it comes from, or at least initially, the understanding that everybody deals with trauma in a different way. So, like, we can't make anybody happy, so we won't do anything, or we'll do so little, offer a few things, and then we're done. And it really becomes, instead of really digging into that, everybody deals with trauma. Okay, so what might they need? What are best practices? Who's out there that could be a resource? Instead, they use it as an excuse. And it's almost the exact playbook in every school shooting where we know people and have talked to people, where almost always the educators feel like this has not been handled well, that their needs have not been met, that there's so much more that could have been done to care both for the students and for the educators, and that educators are the last to get the support, which we've actually heard those words several times over the last year when we were trying to kind of help some communities and bring the team in. an acknowledgement, which is actually kind of even pathetic if you think about it from decision makers in districts to say, oh, actually, yeah, I think you're right that educators really haven't been getting what they need. I think it's deeper. It's what you said about like, by not addressing how do you move forward in something difficult. I mean, just take the word trauma out of it. Just say, how do you help kids? How do you help your colleagues? How do you talk things through? How do you work through things? And I'm sure it's a microcosm, a school district of society. And we have a tremendous problem with grief in our country. Like you're expected to turn around and come right back to work after something happens. Like we just don't deal with grief the way other countries do. But I find it really sad that there hasn't been much progress on that in terms of what we see. Interestingly enough, I just watched a film called Run Amok, and it addresses this exactly. And it doesn't make the adults look very good, but I think it talks about how do you have this enormous problem of like a tragedy that was so unbelievably sad and traumatic, and then how do you like do school? And I just think we have a long way to go to really make a difference. All I can say in terms of what our role is there is to try at every angle, often very frustrating moments, to reach decision makers and try to chip away. Let them know who we are. Let them know what teachers need. Advocate for support. Advocate for programs that won't even cost them money or that much at all, that you can connect your teachers with people who get it, as we hope to make some inroads, especially when it comes to like training, like prevention and intervention, postvention training. And hopefully like that will teach those in power that like, hey, this is actually pretty good when you address this. You're going to have better attention. You'll have healthier educators who are taking care of themselves and so that they can take care of our kids. And in the meantime, hopefully schools will start to get the work because, you know, they like to be the first, right? Like superintendents and school districts and awards and things. Well, let them take this on then, and we will amplify you.
I think about Sarah Lerner, and I don't remember if she said this on Paula's podcast or Kiki's podcast or both, because she's the first to say that she talks about it over the course of multiple segments. But when it came to the assistance that she received in the aftermath of Parkland and their community, rather, she mentions that the issue at hand was that the school board in the district wasn't really sure how to assist. So I think in instances like that, her conclusion was that sometimes it's better to really stay out of it because you're just not sure what people need. And because of that,
Yeah.
nobody was ever asked, what do they need? And I'll also mention here, because Sarah does it publicly, I have been taking guitar lessons with them on several occasions as well, but Eagles Haven in Parkland has become a
Oh,
wellness resource center that's about a mile away from the school, where there are 7 days a week classes of all different kinds of art, performance, humanities, brain, body. Like I said, I've been very inconsistently taking guitar with them for the past year and a half. And
nice.
it's just a great space for people who are and are not affiliated with Parkland in any way, just to get free resources with what healing activities look like. And then, first of all, I didn't realize that Teachers Unify was only a couple years old. I think in my mind, because of how much has been accomplished since, it feels
Oh,
like it's been a lot more established than just 4 years. So that's
thank
a
you.
kudos to all the work that has been done. So for those of us that are also thinking about those preventative efforts, first of all, learning about organizations like Teachers Unify and finding ways to get involved is one. But then I also think about proactive versus reactive strategies. And I would not be surprised if it was the Kleiman and Archer text that talked exactly about that. When it comes to being proactive in classrooms, like we said, showing up, having care, having presence, I would even say that as an English teacher, looking at student writing is a form of violence prevention. I'm sure Paula would even
Yes.
say the same. But I'm also thinking about what are some other proactive strategies that everyday educators, without even realizing that they're doing it, can be just agents of care in their classrooms to prevent tragedy.
I think it's really what teachers do every day is the first thing I would say. And I think it's probably so ingrained in your routine as a teacher, just how you are and how you communicate with your students, noticing, right? I think what frustrates me most when I hear about terrible incident of gun violence and questions about the perpetrators start emerging, and as we find things out, I get frustrated when a reporter will say, "Didn't anybody notice? What were the signs?" And what I always shout back into the void is, oh, trust me, there were signs. And it was the teacher, like you mentioned your experience before, that teachers bring forward concerns all the time. But the bandwidth of, we often have one counselor shared among 4 schools. Like there just aren't enough trusted adults, nurses, people who kids can confide in. And teachers pass along the information, but because we have this, like, unfortunately, we have trouble asking these direct questions, they don't get followed through like they should. And so I think what I would just say is keep doing what you're doing, connecting, notice what you notice, keep bringing forward your concerns, even when you feel like they're left unheard. Don't let it go. Keep bringing it up, because you really could save the life. And I think that connection that teachers have with students is just profoundly important when it comes to a kid's growth. And we'll probably have no idea how much we've reached kids, but being a model, allowing them to talk through things, whether it's like thinking through their idea of a book or telling you something that they're having a problem with, equally important. So I think I would say keep doing what you're doing. And as frustrating as it is that when you don't get help, keep asking for it.
Thank you for that. And I also think about just the power of numbers when it comes to helping students. I know that when I was in the face of students who I felt were in crisis back in my first year of teaching middle school in 2019, there was a point where I realized that I couldn't support my students on my own. And so what I did is that I would go to some of their other teachers. If I was the class they had in the morning, well, they had 3 classes a day. They had a class during lunch and they had a class in the afternoon. So I would go to those different teachers and just say to them, hey, for this student, we need to form a village for them. Doesn't matter if you like them or not, doesn't matter if they like you or not. We just need to be a lifeline and a village for the student, so they know that at all times of the day, they have adults in the building that care about them being safe for now until the next adult in their lives outside of school can also support them. And I think building those villages for students as well really is exponential to them and their support. So, Abby, what a great conversation. And thank you again for opening our eyes to what's going on around us. And as we start to conclude, I wanted to ask 2 things. The first thing is we spoke in our pre-chat about just the public health epidemic that gun violence has showed us, both within communities and in schools as well. And when it comes to the work you're doing in Teachers Unify, what should we recognize about how violence occurs, even for example, in domestic households, and the impact that has in schools? And my follow-up to that is, where can our listeners learn more about you and support the work done by Teachers Unify?
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. It's been so great to talk to you and to get to know you over the last few months. I think when we talk about safety in schools, we think about just what happens within the school gates. Well, there's a study from the outlet The Trace that states that there are 57 incidents of gun violence, an average of 57 a day in this country, either within or just outside of school. And I think when we talk about school safety, we need to realize that we're talking about school and community safety. A school is not just like a random building in the middle of a town. There's special events, graduations, all the things that bring communities together, parent teacher conferences, open house. It's a community hub. And so when we talk about school safety, we really need to look at it like it is the entire community, and that the teachers and the admins and the helpers and the lunch ladies and the custodians are all a part of this ecosystem that is the community. And when there is an incident, when there is a suicide by firearm and it impacts the school, because if a child went there or a sibling is there, when there's a horrible instance of domestic violence and then the kids don't return, God forbid, terrible stories. Lately, it just seems like unending. We need to really pay attention to the teachers who are having to pick up the pieces or having to help the students and their peers understand the enormity of what happened and how to navigate their feelings about it. So I think this is definitely a paradigm shift, and I think it will help the dire need for gun violence prevention. And if we could get some of the funding restored for essential programming from the Department of Education, from communities that have benefited tremendously from community violence prevention programs, severe declines in gun violence incidences due to investment in communities. So I think if we can look at this more broadly, it will help bring this issue back to the forefront, even though it's hard to get to the front of things because it's so rough out there in terms of what we're dealing with at these challenging times. But for those folks out there who are interested in Teachers Unify and learning more, please visit our website, teachersunify.org. We're on Instagram, we're on Blue Sky, we're on Facebook and LinkedIn. Our crisis intervention team is out there for you, even if it's just you want to talk to somebody from there. Please give us a call at 203-296-3689 or email us at response@teachersunify.org. And if you go to our website and you click on join us, you'll find a way to at least get looped in. You'll receive our newsletter and find out about our community meetings. I failed to mention this earlier. We have a monthly community meeting. It's the last Wednesday of every month, and it's open to everybody, educators, retired educators, people who are just like Teachers Unify and want to hear more. Where two Teachers Unify ambassadors are hosts and have a variety of topics, and they have been wonderful. We've had about 4 of them so far, and they're just an incredible way to stay connected and to meet people who care about this issue. So I hope you'll join one of our community meetings.
We'd love to be present. Thank you so much for that. And we'll definitely have that information available in the show notes as well. And one final question. Are there any final takeaways for our listeners for today?
Thank you for taking the time to listen. If you are a teacher or you know or love a teacher, tell them thank you for all you do, because every day they show up, whether their lesson plan is completely ironed out or they open it up and see where the kids take it. They are mostly a trusted adult, and just share your appreciation with them for all that they do. And I think spreading the word that the importance of educators, especially in the movement to end gun violence. I would love a little shout out here and there because we're often left out of the conversation, but vital voices.
And of course, when this episode airs in June, that is Gun Violence Prevention Month. So our efforts will continue to grow in importance during that time and all others as well. So Abby, thank you so much for sharing your story and your perspective with us today. And you're continuing to remind us of something powerful, that even in moments where teachers don't have the perfect words, their presence still matters by showing up and holding space and helping students rediscover themselves as part of a community hub. And you've been spending your career doing exactly that and helping others do the same. Thank you for joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast. If today's episode inspired you or made you think differently, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or review wherever you listen to podcasts, and stay connected with us on the @Classroom Narratives podcast over Instagram and Facebook. Remember, together we can transform our scars into stars in education, one conversation at a time.